Hi everyone, and welcome to the 17th and final episode in our series of commentaries on the crisis, in which over the last 4 months we've brought insight from a very large number of sectors, a large number of friends and parts of the HR community who have attended, etc. And I'd like to, in this final episode, we have invited back some of our favourite speakers from the series to hear how things have changed since we last spoke, and reflect as a group on what the future may hold. So I'm delighted to be joined this morning by Brian O'Donoghue, who's the Director of People at Marie Curie, who came way back. His first speech was in episode 8. So I can't quite remember when that was, Brian, but that's quite a time ago. So thanks for coming, Brian. Welcome.
Yep, thank you.
And also Jonathan Kohler, who's the Head of Change, Control and Governance at MS Amlin, who I think was on episode 10. Can you remember, Jonathan?
Oh, I can't remember the number. It was back in June, right?
Back in June. So welcome again. I can see you're both well. So which is a great to see you're both well and that we're all back together. So I'd like to thank you for attending, everybody, and acknowledge the diversity of attendees. So we've got the usual mix of people who are program directors, HR professionals, HRDs, and other HR team members. So welcome everybody, and thank you for coming today. So I'd really like to focus today on some of the things which have changed as we've moved largely from an exercise of managing the crisis to actually having relaunched our businesses and services. So I think that's a really interesting theme to discuss. So Brian, when we last spoke, Marie Curie, who are one of the largest palliative care providers in the UK, really were in the eye of the storm with a combination of real need from a service provision point of view and strong, more need than ever, and at the same time hits on the ability for the organisation to raise funds, etc. So it was kind of, and also with the retail division closed down. So it seemed like a very difficult period. So what has changed since then, and how are things going for Marie Curie?
Okay. Well, I guess how things have changed is we're seeing a bit more stability in terms of now at least we've got good access to PPE, which helps us maintain frontline services. That's always good. And we've seen reopening of some of our shops, not all. We've probably, I think, got about 25%, so about a quarter of our estate is open again, but trading is obviously difficult because we've had to put in place new restrictions around how people can access and things, and obviously a quarter of your estate isn't going to drive a lot of funds, but it's kind of becoming more stable, and we're now into the stages, I guess, of trying to plan and be prepared for what is, I guess, for most organizations, an uncertain future. One of the big drives has to be around efficiency and effectiveness, I guess, as an organization, because we have seen fundraising hugely impacted by the COVID crisis. We don't have volunteers going out and collecting money in face-to-face kind of activities still. That's hasn't been opened up. So a huge impact in terms of our ability to raise funds to provide services. So we need to start thinking much more critically, I guess, about the long term. What's the shape of the service that we can offer, and how can we maximize our effectiveness? So use far less money, I guess, to drive a bigger impact, because the need for our services isn't stagnant or getting smaller. It's actually growing. So we need to think about how we fit into the ecosystem, I guess, of palliative care and care in general. I think the COVID crisis probably driven a lot of rethinking at a national level around the NHS and social care and community-based services, and how those should be perhaps better integrated. There isn't any integration at the moment really between NHS and social care, and I think the impact on care homes, for example, and the effect on people within care homes through the crisis has brought those kind of issues into stark kind of clarity, and there is this need to change the way the nation thinks about social care and provision of kind of NHS type care, so acute care. So we need to be part of that discussion and part of that evolution of thinking, I think, around those things. And we're talking with commissioners, we're talking with kind of colleagues in the NHS, and trying to influence and think about how that shape changes. And as a more effective and efficient organization, how can we fit into that and work with others, not necessarily try to be heroic and say, oh, we're going to solve all the problems around palliative care, but how can we be part of the solution, and working with other organizations, other charities, NHS and funded organizations as well. And I guess as well, the other thing that's changing and that we're thinking much more about is the shape of our kind of back office functions. How do we work in the future? We still haven't gone back into offices in any great way. We're still predominantly where we can working remotely, people working from homes. You can see my plants. So that's not going to change anytime soon. Lots of organizations are saying that they're never going to force people back into offices. We probably have a bit more of a balanced view. We do need offices. We need offices for collaboration and projects and things like that, project meetings and team meetings, because there is this kind of sense of isolation a lot of people have. So there is a benefit to being able to kind of share space and work together. But we don't see ourselves rushing back into that. And when we do go back, I think it'll be a very different environment. And potentially there's opportunity there in terms of cost as well, because we can potentially reduce our office estate and footprint and potentially save some money. So yeah, lots of thinking, I guess, around where we're going in the future, and planning to think, how do we get the most out of the money that we raise so that we can be as effective as possible.
Very interesting. It sounds like there's a recognition it's going to be a long haul before getting back to a more normal world for the organisation. And I guess what you're describing is opportunities to refocus and focus harder on the priorities, etc., which I suppose to some extent could be a positive exercise in terms of really driving at the things, doing the things which are really important and critical really well.
Yeah. And we've seen some, I mean, there have been some benefits that have come out of the kind of changes that we've kind of experienced over the last few months. We're actually much better at collaborating with people who are remote. So I'm in contact much more frequently with people who are up in Scotland or Northern Ireland or in other parts of the country than I would have been previously, because you kind of rely on them coming for meetings or going to those remote, they're not that remote, but going to these geographically dispersed areas to really engage with people in a meaningful way. But we're getting better, I suppose, at this kind of virtual engagement. So that's been a positive. I think there's also positives in terms of our ability to embrace diversity a bit better with these different ways of working. Marie Curie isn't kind of leading edge, I guess, in terms of how we work with accessibility and people who have reduced ability to access and travel or work in kind of old buildings where we don't have very good access. So actually there's opportunities with using technology in a different way to broaden the talent pool and really appeal to and engage a much more diverse group of potential employees. So there are some opportunities that are arising as well.
Interesting. Thank you for that update. We'll come back with more questions as we progress. Now, Jonathan, welcome. So when we spoke last time, you actually were starting plans about changing the office space and the quantity and locations and all this kind of stuff already. But you know, that was weeks and weeks ago. That could be years ago in the new timeline. So what's been going on, Jonathan? Can you give us an update on MS Atkins and what's on there?
MS Amlin. And the first update I would say is that, yes, you were talking about downsizing our office space, but I actually have downsized my house. So in the intervening 8 weeks, I've moved house. So a lot of change for me personally. I would say that when it comes to MS Amlin, we have made some small decisions, but equally, so for example, we stopped immediately, almost stopped catering on our we have a 45th floor. We use that for a lot of board meetings and also for when we're doing client entertainment. As that's completely stopped, we've just said, you know what, we don't need that. It was a discussion that took place, maybe every year when it comes to budget time, of whether we're going to continue with it or not. And we've just said, now, right, that's it. No, we're going to stop. We're not going to do that anymore, ever again. But in reality, from a decision-making standpoint, we've started what's been snappily called the reoccupation strategy, which I don't particularly like the phrasing, but the idea is we need to figure out how we reoccupy our office space, because it's not going to be like it was before. But we haven't actually made any really big decisions when it comes to our office space. We're focusing on our usual business strategy transformation, I suppose. The stuff that we started last year back in November that has continued through the past 9 months or so. That is the main focus. But when it comes to COVID related decisions, we're still kind of just looking and watching and seeing how our organization reacts. We've been really lucky in that we've been able to fall back on what we've called our work-life better policy, which is just about enabling our colleagues to choose the right place for them to do a task. And if that's at home, it's at home. If it was previously at a coffee shop, it was at a coffee shop or in the office. And what we found is that as an organization, we've really embraced that. And actually, we've been a lot more resilient because of that work-life better policy than perhaps immediately at the start of this crisis we thought we might be. And I'll touch on a little bit more of that later on. But in reality, we've been able to use that policy as a kind of core building block to ensure we've been able to work and continue to insure people. And the other thing I think that we made a big decision on is that we completely pivoted a lot of our learning strategy for this year. So we had a bucket of money set aside to do learning throughout the organization. A lot of that was on our culture, and a lot of that was mainly classroom based. Obviously not doing any of that anymore when it comes to the classroom. We've been able to take some of that culture work and we've repurposed it to focus on what we've called leading through uncertainty. So we made a big decision that we need to enable both our line managers and our leaders and our normal kind of colleagues who aren't line managers to be at their best through these uncertain times. So we've got kind of 2 strands that come back together again later on in the year. But that was a big decision we made probably just after we had our call, actually, end of June. And we've spent the last kind of 6 to 8 weeks or so, well, 6 weeks, pivoting that, repositioning it, and creating the Leading Through Uncertainty program, which launches next week.
That's very interesting, because I think that for all of us, the roles of the managers have changed, and they've been under real and significant pressure throughout the crisis, and trying to find ways of supporting them has been really hard. So could you tell us a bit more, Jonathan, about your vision for supporting the managers?
Yeah, and I think it's about giving them ideas and tools to use with their teams. And we've made the very conscious decision to split the Leading Through Uncertainty program into 2. And there's very much a line manager kind of program, and there's a colleague program. And like I said, they do kind of join back at the end. But I think from the manager's point of view, it's about ensuring that you understand your team's boundaries, whether personal boundaries. There's some of us like to work early in the morning, some of us like to work late in the evening, and you shouldn't force colleagues who work the other way to fit to your time scale. We found, especially some of our leaders, that they get up early when they usually start their commute, and they're working from maybe 7 till 7, because the early people want to have the calls in the morning and the late people want to have the calls in the evening, which means everybody's day is stretched. So there's a real focus on boundaries. There's also a focus on trying to help colleagues emotionally and with their well-being, because I think that's one of the things that we've picked up on a lot, is that perhaps in our own little working bubbles, we're very collaborative, but there's a real gap when it comes to the emotional support. Those coffee table chats, or those water cooler chats that people have. not having those, there's a lot of tools and techniques and ideas that we've seen from other organizations that not every line manager is currently using. So we're just trying to spread the word about some of those things, like team breaks where everyone gets on a call with a cup of tea in the morning, or the kind of virtual drinks idea in the evenings where, you know, perhaps at the end of the working day on a Friday, everyone can get on a WebEx or a Zoom call and have a drink together and just, you know, have a conversation which isn't about work. But equally, there's a lot of stuff that we're trying to focus on for colleagues about how they can set those boundaries up as well, and what to expect around, you know, basic stuff like the change curve. People have heard of the change curve, but you're going to feel uncertain, and that's okay. You're going to feel out the loop again, that's okay. So there's some top-down stuff, and there's also some bottom-up stuff to try and help managers and colleagues to feel in control of themselves and also in control of their own destiny and fate, I suppose, through what are crazy uncertain times.
I think this is as we all come to a recognition that elements of the crisis are going to continue for a long time, and changes we've seen for a long time. This support of managers and kind of, because some of the things you're describing actually are things which would have been good to do at any time, but it's become more pointed, I guess, during the COVID crisis.
Yeah, definitely. I think that, you know, from my own experience as a line manager, we used to do on a Monday morning, we would get together in one of the little booths on our floor, and we'd grab a cup of coffee and we'd have a chat and we'd talk about our week and what we were doing. As soon as we went to this way of working, I carried that on, but on WhatsApp. But, you know, that's because, you know, I kind of thought that was an okay thing to do, but other line managers might not, and they might not necessarily think to do that if they're not in the office seeing someone. So just those little nudges to people, I think, are really helpful, because this isn't a short-term thing. I genuinely believe that the way we work will change, and has changed, in fact, probably for the long term. So if we can start getting better at some of these things now, it's only going to improve over the next couple of years or so.
I like the way you described it as, it seems to me that what you're describing is not prescriptive. You're not telling people what to do, and, you know, you must have a meeting on a Tuesday morning and then another one on Wednesday evening and every Friday. But instead, it's giving people tools and the ability to be responsive and think about their team.
Yeah, and we can get deep into the cultural problems of MS Amlin circa 2018. But one of the big decisions we made a couple of years ago is that we need to start treating our people like adults. And that means letting them make mistakes. It means letting them make their own decisions, learning through experience, like, you know, like all grown-ups do, and children, right? But because of that, we have had to over the last couple of weeks and months, we have had to learn as we go. But treating people like adults, I think, has, in a way, set us up really well for this, because people are able to make grown-up decisions and aren't sat there going, oh, I don't know what to do because I've got no one to tell me. So, yeah, I think that kind of cultural journey we've been on in the past couple of years it put us in a good place, or a better place anyway, to be a bit more resilient over the past, 12, 16 weeks or so.
So, Brian, have you been considering the evolving role of managers and colleagues during the crisis? And so, yes, what are Mary Curie's thoughts in this area?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of what Jonathan was just talking about kind of resonates really strongly. We do recognize that actually after a period of sustained working from home, people were starting to struggle with just this constantly on kind of scenario where people expect emails to be answered more quickly and to be on Teams kind of constantly, and people weren't getting any downtime, and it was a big worry. So we implemented some sustainable home working arrangements, which kind of defined what the core working hours were, but give people flexibility to work within that. Kind of said that people should build in focus time into their day, so they're not at kind of beck and call of the email or the Teams, and kind of saying that Friday afternoons is a meeting free period, and people shouldn't book meetings, and some other kind of rules that kind of help people to get a sense of normality and within their week and things naturally, and kind of set it up within their teams so they had that structure that gave people a little bit of kind of ability to have some downtime and manage their work effectively, but not all managers kind of do the same thing. So we engage with our staff. We've done surveys with them to understand, well, what actually would work for you, and we've built that into our ways of working, and we're doing the same in terms of our plans for future ways of working and what the office should look like, for example. So we've done a survey to try and understand how are people's preferred ways of working. So I guess one of the things that we're doing a lot more, and again, the kind of shift has perhaps enabled this to some extent, is trying to be much more collaborative in the way that we make decisions about things that are going to impact everybody's lives. So not just relying on some kind of managers sitting at the top having all the best ideas, because that's just nonsense, and actually taking ideas from right across the organization and trying to build them into our thinking. So the management team become enablers and kind of people who pull the information together and kind of send it back out there, but actually we're trying to get ideas from right across the organization. So I think the dynamic is changing, and we saw, I think probably through the crisis as well, that there was the idea of leadership wasn't just this kind of top-down thing. There was some really strong evidence of leadership coming from right across the organization. That's something that we've been trying to encourage and push. So this kind of devolved leadership to some extent. And actually the crisis has shown that actually that's a really effective way of doing things. So we're trying to build that into our DNA really as we go forward. How do we build it into our culture that actually the idea of leadership isn't something that is this kind of small group of people at the top of the organization, that it's a much more kind of devolved and widespread concept, that actually we can take ideas and leadership ideas from anywhere and harness it and yeah, just manage that in a more effective way. That's not easy, and clearly it's a cultural change for the organization. There's a big shift for a lot of people within our teams, but it's something that we want to try and harness really and understand a little bit better about how we can make that more effective.
I mean, that's been a comment from many of our commentators. Many commentators over the last 17 weeks have been saying that they're actually seeing much more leadership from different areas. I guess things like micromanagement is not possible. It's gone. You can't. I can't sit opposite my team and say, "Don't do that and do this instead." I don't know what they're doing. I'm remote, and I mean that's one small example. But people have to manage their own day in their own time, and for some people, that's a whole new thing. So, Jonathan, is that something you guys have been noticing too, and the need to listen to people and their ideas more?
Yeah, we do we have like a monthly video conference as a HR function. We have our kind of 50, 55 employees from across the world all jump on a big video call, and we have little breakout groups. And in those little breakout groups, we have little conversations and we have some actions that come out of it. We focus a lot on diversity and inclusion and the Black Lives Matter movement in the kind of previous month, in the late June conference call we had. And we had some amazing ideas come out of that as well, which again, we've been able to implement. And we had our conversation actually just yesterday on our internal engagement survey with, again, some really nice ideas that bubble up from the bottom. So yes, I think the answer is if you give people a platform to have those ideas, then they often get voiced. If they feel confident and comfortable, they're not going to be mocked. There's another great one we did. I completely just kind of sprung to mind. I think it was towards the beginning of the COVID crisis. We set up a little survey thing. I was using a tool called Slido, where people could just put in questions and we could answer them. And it was simple stuff like, what would help you? I think it was 2 questions. What would help you? Or what do you need? Or something like that. And essentially loads of people just started putting things in, which one of them was, I don't have a monitor big enough at home, or I'm really struggling with my laptop at home. So the IT function decided, do you know what? Let's just give everybody £300 towards equipment at home. And, in the grand scheme of things, it's not a lot of money for everyone, considering we're not doing all the, we've not got as many kind of staff in the offices. We're not using as much of the catering stuff. There's a whole load of places where we're saving. So actually giving people up to £300 to spend on, a desk, a laptop screen or whatever, it was such a small thing but had a massive impact. And it just enabled us to show, what, we've asked the people and we've given them something back. And just, I suppose, giving people a platform in which to voice their ideas is the start. And at the moment, because everyone's so remote, you have to be really proactive with that.
It's very interesting because, £300 could sound like a lot or a little, depending on, but, we've all got offices where we've been paying for seats for our staff for many years, and and most of our, well, in fact, all of our offices, and amongst the three of us today, are in central London, and we kind of have forgotten about that investment because it's a significant cost, maintaining space and travel and all these things, and I do wonder what we're going to do with that to support colleagues and people working outside over time. Because, in theory, if all things being equal, those costs are going to reduce for many of us, and the need for people to set up better at home, etc., becomes more important as it becomes a more permanent thing.
And not everybody has the space, and that was one of the things that early on we got feedback from our colleagues on. Is that all of our kind of CEO content from the top down, all the newsletters that we'd started, they often showed our CEOs in their beautiful houses with their, beautiful background and a lovely garden, or, our COO wrote this really heartfelt note to everyone just saying, I get it, and everyone's really struggling. His first line was, I'm writing this to my home office at the bottom of my garden. Some of our junior colleagues were going, hang on a minute, I'm in a three-person flat share I used to live in Clapham, so I'm in a 4-person flat share in Clapham. I haven't got any outdoor space. I'm not allowed outside. I can't go to the gym anymore. And you're telling me about how hard it is to your lovely home office at the end of your garden. So I do think one of the things we learned very quickly is that not everybody has the same privileges, and not everybody has the same space that perhaps I did. So I think we had to be really aware that for some people, the office wasn't just the place where they went to work. It was where they got away from their home situation. We've seen it and it's getting slightly away from perhaps what we were talking about, but with the rise in domestic abuse as well, I don't think we've ever necessarily had to think about writing a domestic abuse policy, but we have, because we recognize that we have colleagues who are at home in situations they don't feel comfortable being in and don't want to be in. So the whole purpose of an office, what the office means and what it is to people, it's kind of changing our perspective on that lot as well. So I think there's always going to be a need for an office.
Yes.
But what it's useful will be different.
One of the things which I think is also true of our offices is that we've expressed in bricks and mortar the organisation of our firms. And so, for example, many people have their HR team next to their legal team, and they probably don't speak very often, but they get to know each other and they understand each other and they know where they're physically situated. And the ability for us to express our organizations physically is no longer possible in that way. So, you walk into I've had a tour of your offices before, and when you take me through them, you go, here's this department, here's that department, those people over there are doing this, and these people over here are doing that. And it's a structure and an organization which we're going to have to find ways of replicating with that physicality not being there, I think. And I think, we've got our HR organizational structures and all this stuff, but I'm not sure if that's really going to nail it. What do you think, Brian, about this?
Yeah, we've been thinking a lot about kind of future office and I guess how do we make sure that, I guess with offices you get these chance engagements, don't you? You get people who just bump into each other who might not have had any plans to meet or whatever, but actually go, oh, it's really good to meet you. Just been doing something and you might be interested or whatever. So you get those kind of chance encounters, and you can't do that virtually. It's yeah, it's just not possible. So there is a role for offices, and we just need to rethink, I guess, how do we do that so that we get the balance right. Lots of people have expressed an interest in continuing to work from home for the majority of time, but most of the people that we've been surveying so far do see a role for the office, whether that's once a week or twice a week, or just coming in for meetings and collaboration and those kind of activities. So we need to think about how we do that. We have started some pilots, actually. We've opened 4 of our offices across the country for 2 things. One, to check that we can actually manage reopening of an office in a safe way, that we can kind of fulfill all the guidelines and make sure that we manage social distancing and all that, but also to cater for those people who are in a 2-bedroom, 3-bedroom flat share and have been spending kind of 3 months sitting on their bed trying to work off a laptop, which isn't the healthiest thing to do. So we give people space to come back into office where they need to, where they just haven't had the capability. And that's worked quite well for the people, but it's fairly limited numbers. And I think we are thinking about, well, actually, when we do come back into the offices, how should they be? Should we have the same kind of layout, or should we blend teams and mix teams up so that actually we don't have this formality? Do we kind of move teams around? And obviously hot desking is difficult at the moment because of the hygiene issues, but actually going forward is one of the things we would like to have, so that people don't kind of just go back to the same old place and routine and build these kind of artificial kind of barriers around themselves and saying, oh, that's the HR department, nobody goes near there. So we want to think about how do we break down these virtual barriers that exist even in physical workspaces, and get people engaging much more effectively, and I suppose harness the value of those chance encounters that people can have. We haven't come up with any solid decisions on that yet, but it is part of our thinking about how we reopen.
I mean, I think this is really kind of the start of a thought. I don't think anyone's nailed it. It'd be great to hear from our audience if anyone feels that they have got ways of solving this. But there's a lot of progress in creating our individual teams functioning again and getting those teams to work in their individual nature. But that's got the danger that as a colleague in one of those teams, you think that that's the end of the world. There's nothing beyond it within the firm. Whereas we're used to being part of a multitude of teams. And even if we're not regularly speaking to them, we're seeing them, we're interacting with them and all that stuff. And I'm not really hearing a set of ideas to replicate that part. I don't know. What do you think, Jonathan? So
the tool that we found has been, I'm going to say most successful, but that's obviously what I mean by that is successful at the moment, has been a tool called Yammer. I don't know if any of you have heard of it. It's a bit like Facebook for work, I suppose. But we use Yammer now. We've got in our organization, I think we've got about 1,700 people across the world, and I think we've got over 1,000 who are actively using Yammer now. But it's quite nice because it doesn't matter what team you're in. There are kind of team groups in Yammer, but actually it's things like the learning. There's like a learning group. There's a well-being group. There's a diversity group. And some of these groups that have sprung up through Yammer, it doesn't care what function or business unit you're in. You can join them and you can talk and you can chat in them regardless. So that's actually been quite a good tool for us, and we've seen a lot of traffic on there. So I suppose it's a way of getting people, we network on social media now when we're in our personal lives. So it's, I suppose, a way of replicating that networking across MS Amlin in a social kind of way, but within the kind of confines of the work ecosystem. That's a lot of words, but I hope that kind of made sense.
Yes, it's quite interesting. If I were applying to join a new firm right now, and I know we haven't seen many moves, etc. It's a different way of thinking about it, because I'm effectively applying to join a team rather than a big organization, because there's no great big doors, there's no walking through, arriving at the office. It's actually I'm actually going to be joining a team of colleagues rather than that great entity. I am thinking.
Yeah, I heard a really interesting term in one of our leadership meetings the other day, which was COVID hires. So our talent growth recruitment leader was saying that she's hearing the term COVID hires a lot in some of her social bubbles, because there's a view that perhaps in 6 months' time, we're going to look back at all of the COVID hires we've made and just see how have we integrated them? How have we onboarded them? Did all of those little changes and things that we did in the heat of the moment, did they make a difference? For example, I know I actually had to think really long and hard about whether I'd met this colleague in person or not, because I feel like she onboarded herself pretty well, to be fair. She was putting in coffees with people. She was meeting people virtually. She's always got a video camera on. And I genuinely was like, did I meet this person before or after we stopped working in the office? I can't remember. Now, to me, that's a fantastic kind of outcome from an onboard. But equally, there are others who perhaps I haven't necessarily built that relationship with. So there's definitely going to be, I think, a review in maybe 6 months' time of all the COVID hires and how they've been onboarded.
Now,
can I interject, Tom? Because we've actually just had a really good question on this topic. So before you go on to your next topic,
yes.
A question's come through on the whole recruitment side. Do you think you'll go as far as hiring people who aren't even based in the UK because of the effective remote working?
Brian, you're looking like you're thinking. Do you want to go first?
I'm thinking that Barbados recently offered the opportunity for people to work their visa free for up to a year, and I thought I'd love to do that. But I think we haven't made a decision on that yet. I think we have some people who were based in offices in the UK who are not UK nationals, and they've gone back to their homes during the crisis and have been working remotely, and obviously they're working just as well as anybody who's based in the UK, London or anywhere. So we've got people in Italy and places that are working very effectively. So there's no barriers to it. I think it's more of a psychological barrier about it. There might be some tax issues, but there's no barrier to it particularly. The issue is, I guess, when we do start reopening offices and we want to have those collaborative meetings, it's obviously just a bit more challenging to kind of organize around that, but I think we should. But as I say, I don't know how quickly or how easily it'll be to change some managers' kind of perceptions about where people should be based.
What about you, Jonathan?
So we've had kind of this conversation. We're a financial services insurance company. It was mainly about money, actually, and benchmarking of salaries. Because the question was being raised: if I have a member of my team that wants to become a contractual home worker, so that instead of their working location being the London office or the Chelmsford office or wherever, it's from home, we would benchmark their salary differently. And I suppose what we've been talking about is going forward, if someone says, hey, do you know what, I'm happy, I'd like to come and work with you, but I'd like to be a home worker contractually, we would benchmark them based on a regional benchmark as opposed to a London weighted benchmark, or same with any of our other locations, right? So I think the answer to the question is probably yes, we would absolutely look, and we are trying to be as diverse as we can with our candidate slates at the moment. But I think there is still a question around benchmarking and whether we would be London weighting salaries for a London-based office role versus if someone's performing that role from, I don't know, the Outer Hebrides, would we still pay them the same amount? Well, probably not. So there's questions, but I think to answer the question, I think we would. Yeah, definitely.
I think the other consideration, sorry, Tom, is going to be, I hate to mention the B word, but obviously post-Brexit, if somebody is based in France or Spain or Italy and they're working for a UK-based company, what are the visa issues that are going to be around those? And that's something that will be interesting to see how that's resolved.
Yeah,
it is quite interesting though, because in a lot of outsources, particularly technical outsourcing activities, there's been kind of far-shore offshoring for decades now. However, often that's proved difficult, and that kind of offshoring thing's been found difficult because of the need to rely on just Zoom and other calls, etc. Now, we're all getting to a point where we're mastering this stuff. Well, at least we're a lot better at it than we were before. So I wonder actually whether working with those kind of arrangements, more of a global type working environment, outsourcing activities to different countries, etc., is going to be a trend that picks up.
I think it matters on the task that's being done as well. I think that we've already seen success in other fields with task-orientated, project-orientated teams. If you're, I think there was one recently where you had a robot in one country be operating on somebody where the surgeon was not in the same room, not in the same country. I can't, off the top of my head, can't remember it, but I feel like it was a couple of weeks back this was talked about. I think if you're doing something which is very project focused, where your team is doesn't matter. Everyone's got clarity of their role, clarity of the task, clarity of the objectives. You can go off and do your piece and come back together whenever. Whereas I think if you're in more of the creative, collaborative, longer term service industry, it does get a little bit more difficult because some of those tasks don't lend themselves well. So there's someone going off and doing it. So I do think it will be task dependent and like the objective dependent on whether a truly diverse, spread out workforce who only meet virtually will work long term.
Very interesting. Now I've got my final question for both of you, which is a bit of a left fielder, but it is this. And how much of all the changes and all the things which have changed in your business do you think are accelerations of things which were happening anyway or should have been happening? And how much do you think is stuff which is new from the COVID crisis? I'll give you a couple of seconds to give that a bit of thought. But I'm hearing this comment from a lot of people, which is most of the changes to their business are things which they were planning, thinking about, should have done, all this kind of stuff. But the crisis has accelerated and made it higher priority and brought focus to those things. And I wonder what your guys' thoughts are on that. So, Brian, what do you think?
I think one of the things that's being accelerated, and we're not there yet, but it's something that's kind of being planned for, is this move towards being a much more place-based organization in terms of where decisions are made and how we react to local requirements. So being a national organization, but that is very locally focused in terms of the services that we offer. And I think the thing that I mentioned earlier about leadership kind of happening in a much more devolved way, I think has supported the thinking around that, to say that actually you don't need to have leadership decisions being made at the central place, that actually having a much more locally focused and place-based activity is effective and probably much more suitable for the type of work that we're doing in terms of providing care that is close to and related to the communities that we work within. So yeah, I think that's something that's probably accelerating, and we've seen through the crisis that actually it's a good model for us to
I mean, that's
follow.
very exciting. That's very exciting. And you were describing earlier how these kind of tools allowing you to touch base more frequently with
Absolutely, yeah.
some of the regions, etc. That's really great news. So acceleration of some trends. Jonathan, how much acceleration, how much revolution has? What are your thoughts?
Okay, so acceleration. I said it earlier. Work life better. The treating our people like adults and allowing them to choose where to work from. You know, we thought it would take a couple of years for people to get really used to working from home and working hours that really suit them and seeing the benefits of it overnight. So that's been hugely accelerated. But from a kind of a bit of a left field revolution, I don't think it's definitely left field, but our IT infrastructure, for years, we've just kind of got on with it and figured it out and put sticking plasters on it. But you know, it worked pretty well. And we, I think I said back in June, we recognized that even our kind of Lloyd's-based underwriting teams were surprised at how well they coped from an IT point of view. But it's absolutely accelerated, from what I've seen, it's accelerated our thinking around our IT strategy because we need to be better, we need to be more resilient, we need to invest heavily in how it operates, because although we got through it by the skin of our teeth, I think there's a recognition that we can't go on like that, because if this is the new normal, then we can't rely on some of the services we've got, which are being held together with plasters at the moment, to not break.
Yes, that's very interesting. We are seeing a significant uptick in fixing things which have been unfixed for a long time.
Yeah,
It's
exactly.
become really important. Good. So, Zoe, are there any more questions for now, or shall I move on to our close? Yes.
There is two questions actually.
Yeah.
To both of you. Have you or do you plan to do promotions? One challenge is it's much easier to promote people who are working and not on furlough. But what are your thoughts on how to ensure furloughed people get the same development opportunities and aren't at a disadvantage?
That's a good
quite a loaded question.
I mean, we haven't. I guess we haven't planned any kind of promotions as such. So there is a lot of discussion at the moment around restructuring of teams and understanding, what skills and what structures we need to fit the model of organization that we see that we need going forward. How people who are furloughed will fit into that. I mean, we've been pretty good at staying in contact with all of the people that have been on furlough right through the process, and we're bringing a lot of them back now anyway. But they've been kind of regularly communicated with. They've been able to access things like the weekly CEO kind of team meeting and town hall meeting that's virtual. They've been able to access all the training and all those kind of things. So hopefully skills and everything are being kept up to date. Actually, there's opportunity. A lot of people who've been on furlough are probably maintaining their skills far better than some of us who've been working through the crisis. But yeah, like any kind of situation, if we do have opportunities for new roles or promotions, it'll be open to everybody, and we'd just go through our normal processes. We wouldn't kind of downplay or kind of think less of somebody who's been on furlough in terms of their skills or ability to contribute because of the fact that they've been on furlough. Actually, we see people going on furlough as a huge benefit for us as an organization, because we're in the charity sector, and actually people have sacrificed, I suppose, a lot and actually have been supporting the organization by being on furlough. So actually we feel a huge debt of gratitude to a lot of the people who have been put on furlough, and we see that as a huge support for the organization. So we wouldn't kind of discount them in any way.
Jonathan, any thoughts on that?
So when it comes to promotions, we will put it this way: when we had our bonus participation letters in April for the year 2020, they essentially said, "Don't get your hopes up." And we've been very clear with all of our employees that, financially we're going to struggle this year, as is most organisations. So we're not talking about promotions, we're not talking about salary rises. All of that type of stuff is completely on the back burner, and we're being very clear and transparent with all our colleagues on that. When it comes to development, that's a really good one. And one of the main ways in which our front office staff would learn is through osmosis, by sitting next to someone with a lot of experience and hearing the way they talk, hearing the way they interact with colleagues, with brokers, with the insured. So we recognize that is going to be missing at the moment. And it's, again, one of those elements of the Leading Through Uncertainty program around how do you develop junior staff? How do you make sure that they are able to continue to grow and develop? One of the other things we've done is we've just gone live with Workday Learning solution, which, hang on, just need to put my battery on. Workday Learning provides our colleagues with a nice, easy platform to get into things like LinkedIn Learning, Harvard Managed Mentor, and some of those online learning platforms. So again, we recognize organizationally that some of that on-the-job learning and development might not necessarily be there from our more junior employees, but we're trying to provide both a top-down route for managers to say, you need to think about this, but equally giving all of our colleagues access to things so they can learn new skills, have access to new ideas, so they can kind of develop themselves a little bit, as well as relying on that osmosis learning that perhaps you used to rely upon back in the day.
Mm-hmm. That's very interesting. That learning in different ways, I think, is going to become really important in the next few months, particularly for new starters and new colleagues who are starting their career. Sorry, you said there was a second question?
Yes. Finally, you're both social butterflies, and we see you at various networking events and our seminars where you meet peers and share best practice. How have you replaced that networking with other companies? So we've talked about, networking internally, but what about, and you also said about benchmarking and things. So how have you been going about that?
So, Jonathan, do you want to go first?
I'll go.
Sorry, Brian. Okay, I'll go first. So for me, I'm a big lover of coffee, and therefore I book in coffees with people, virtual coffees. I've gone through the network and said, right, who have I not spoken to in a while? Booking in a coffee with them. Who else have I perhaps not spoken to in a couple of months? And I'll probably bump into them to the street and say, hey, let's go to the coffee shop. So I'm just trying to touch base with people through that. And I found it's been really nice, actually, because I've got to know some of these people on a more personal level, as well as kind of a work level, which has been useful. And also just if things pop into my inbox, like some of the stuff that the Veren team have been doing, just signing up to those things and just saying, and going along, listening in. And again, you might see a name you recognize and then drop them a little email and say, hey, it'd be lovely to catch up. LinkedIn as well, just people on LinkedIn that say, I'd like to have a virtual coffee with you. Would you be interested? Making time, I think, Brian, you said it, about making time for personal development or workspace. I'm trying to make time for networking time as well, because if you don't do that, your network will kind of shrink. You will lose touch with people, and that's not necessarily great from a learning point of view, and also thinking about your future development too.
Good.
Sorry, Brian.
Good. It is interesting, though. We're all missing our conferences, our meetings across industry, all those kind of things which we used to rely on. And I'm not seeing a fully working substitute to that activity yet. But I think that's a work in progress. And with that, I'd like to thank all our attendees and thank Brian and Jonathan for attending today. It's great to talk to you both. Thank you very much. It's been
thanks for having me.
Doing the last 17 weeks of this exercise every week has been a real honour and privilege, and I've enjoyed and learnt so much from so many of our participants and people who have spoken. So, and you guys are key examples of that. So thank you very much. And then finally, thank you to our audience for listening to so many of our HR leaders. I guess we've been trying to replicate some of that networking capability through this series. And so I hope it's been valuable to you all, and thank you for attending. I'd finally like to say we are moving on from an anatomy of the crisis to looking at the future and how life is going on for organizations and the changes we're expecting to occur. So we'll be talking to other panelists over future weeks about that exercise. I think there's some really interesting half-formed and unfinished activities which are critical to our business, which we've touched upon today, which we've got to develop and learn from each other in the future. So I'm really excited about that new series, and we're looking forward to being joined once again by Brian and Jonathan in the future to talk about that, because it's so fascinating talking about both of your businesses. So thank you very much, everybody, and thank you very much, Jonathan and Brian.
Cool. Thanks, Tom.
Great.
Thank you.
And with that, we'll see you all soon.
Yeah. Enjoy the rest of your day.